I was fired for sending one email asking why minority employees kept getting passed over. They called it disruptive. But losing that job was just the beginning. I exposed everything they tried to hide. And the man who fired me, he lost a lot more than I did. Eric had always believed that good work would speak for itself. That if you kept your head down, delivered great results, and treated people fairly, you'd rise. For the first few years of his career, that belief seemed to hold true, at least on the surface. He worked as a communications manager at Arcadia Creative, one of Chicago's most respected advertising firms. The office was sleek, modern, and full of bright young talent. Glass walls, inspirational quotes, diversity posters in the break room. From the outside, it looked like the kind of place that cared. But Eric paid attention, and what he saw didn't match the image. At meetings, it was always the same handful of people leading the conversation. Promotions went to the same type of candidate, polished Ivy League, overwhelmingly white. Meanwhile, the firm's few Black and Latino employees were often given less visible roles, even when their portfolios outshone their peers. Eric had seen brilliant pitches buried under vague feedback. He'd watched a Black colleague's client win get reassigned to someone else for relationship management. At first, he brushed it off. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe there were factors he didn't know. But the pattern kept repeating. Eric wasn't a whistleblower type. He didn't like drama. He prided himself on being steady, someone who could navigate tough rooms without losing his cool. But watching the same injustices play out over and over began to chip away at him. And it wasn't just what he saw. It was what he heard in the hallways, what people whispered when they thought no one was listening. Like the time he overheard a senior executive laugh and say, "Well, Marcus is great, but he doesn't exactly look like our usual face for tech clients." Or when a Latina colleague, Camilla, shared how her request to lead a campaign was rejected because clients might not connect with her vibe. That same campaign went to someone with less experience, someone who just happened to be a white guy with a golf handicap and a Rolex. Eric tried to offer support quietly. He encouraged his colleagues to speak up to keep records. But everyone was afraid. "It's just how the system works," one coworker told him. "You push too hard, you disappear." Still, Eric couldn't let it go. Not entirely. One day, after yet another talented employee of color was passed over for promotion, this time without even an explanation, Eric decided to act. Not with rage, not with accusations, but with a question. He wrote an email. It was addressed to the HR department and CC'd a handful of senior managers, including his own boss, Thomas Gilmore. The tone was calm, professional. Eric didn't point fingers or name names. Instead, he suggested that the company review its internal promotion and evaluation policies to ensure fairness and equity. He cited industry studies. He quoted Arcadia's own mission statement. He ended it with a line that stuck with him. "If we want to be known for bold ideas, let's make sure our own house reflects the values we pitch to clients every day." He hit send just before lunch, not thinking it would cause waves. Maybe stir conversation, start a meeting or two. At most, he expected a polite, generic response from HR. Instead, everything changed. Over the next day, whispers followed him through the office. People stopped making eye contact. A few coworkers privately messaged him to say, "I read your email." Brave move, then went silent. Meetings he was supposed to lead were rescheduled without him. Gilmore stopped replying to his messages. Eric knew he'd touched a nerve. But he didn't realize just how deep that nerve ran, or how personal things were about to get. Because in that moment, Eric thought he was still part of the solution. He had no idea He was about to be treated like a problem. 3 days passed after the email. No response from HR. No acknowledgement from management. Not even a vague, "Thank you for your thoughts." Just silence. The kind that hums under fluorescent lights and grows heavier by the hour. Eric tried to ignore it. Maybe it was just bureaucracy. Maybe they were still deciding how to respond. But the temperature in the office had shifted. Colleagues who used to joke with him in the kitchen, offered tight smiles and quick exits. One even turned and walked the other way when she saw him in the hallway. The silence wasn't neutral. It was strategy. Then on a Thursday afternoon, Eric's calendar pinged with a last-minute meeting request. Subject line HR check-in. No details, just the time, 2:30 p.m. He stared at it for a long moment before accepting. When he walked into the room, both Thomas Gilmore and a stern-faced HR rep were already seated. The blinds were drawn. Gilmore didn't smile. Eric, the HR rep, began, "We've been reviewing your recent communications, and it's become clear that your actions have created disruption within the team." Disruption? Eric blinked, stunned. "You mean the email?" Gilmore leaned forward, fingers laced. "Let's not pretend this was just an email. You involved senior staff in a message that cast doubt on our integrity and created confusion about our values." Eric's voice stayed calm, but his chest tightened. "I raised a concern based on patterns I've observed. I didn't accuse anyone. But the implication Gilmore cut in was that we're running a biased operation. That's a serious charge." The HR rep nodded. "We've received feedback that your message made several team members uncomfortable. It's been seen as divisive. Therefore, effective immediately, your employment with Arcadia Creative is terminated." For a second, the words didn't land. Fired. For an internal suggestion. For asking a question. He tried to speak, but the rep slid a folder across the table. Inside was the termination letter already signed, a severance package, a confidentiality clause. "This is a business decision," she said flatly. "We're offering a generous package in return for a non-disparagement agreement." Eric looked at Gilmore, who simply sat there unreadable. And that was the moment it hit him. This had nothing to do with team disruption. This was about power, about silencing, about making an example out of him so no one else would dare to speak up. The walk of shame, packing up your desk after getting fired, is never dignified. But packing up your desk while your coworkers pretend not to notice, that's something else entirely. No one met his eyes. One person whispered, "Sorry," without even stopping. Camilla, the colleague, he thought might say something, stared at her screen as if he didn't exist. Eric couldn't blame them. He'd seen what fear could do. Still, the silence hurt more than the firing itself. By the time he stepped into the elevator, carrying a box of framed memories and half-used-up notebooks, Eric felt hollow. He didn't go home right away. He sat in his car, in the underground garage, for over an hour. No music, no calls, just silence. They really did it. They shut me down. And no one said a word. Mere campaign quietly done. The damage didn't stop at the termination. In the weeks that followed, Eric started job hunting. He updated his resume, reached out to contacts, applied for positions he was more than qualified for. And yet nothing. A few polite rejections, mostly radio silence. Then a recruiter he knew off the record gave him the truth. People are hesitant. There's talk that you stirred the pot at Arcadia. Some folks think you're a liability. That stung. Eric had always believed in quiet professionalism, in earning respect. Now he was being rebranded as the guy who caused drama. What shocked him more, he hadn't even said anything public. He hadn't tweeted, posted gone to the press. All he did was try to have a conversation within the company. And they'd turned that into a black mark on his name. His inbox was still full of inspirational quotes from Arcadia's company newsletters. Speak your truth. Be the change. The hypocrisy was almost laughable, a flicker of resolve. Eric spent nights rereading his email, wondering if he should have done something differently. He second-guessed every word, every sentence. But deep down, he knew the message had been respectful, reasonable, necessary. They hadn't fired him because he was reckless. They fired him because he was right. And once that thought took root, it grew into something else. Not anger, but purpose. If they wanted him quiet, he'd make noise. If they wanted him erased, he'd write himself back in. But not with rage, with facts, with proof, with the truth. The first few weeks after leaving Arcadia were the darkest of Eric's life. Every job interview seemed like a dead end. Every lead fell flat. He was too qualified for some positions, but then labeled a liability for others. A professional identity built over a decade of work had been reduced to one email, one action, and now it felt like the world was closing in. His savings dwindled, but it wasn't the money that gnawed at him. It was the silence, the isolation, and that's when the message came. One evening, as Eric was scrolling through LinkedIn, aimlessly trying to distract himself from the sinking feeling of hopelessness, he saw a direct message from someone he didn't recognize. The profile picture was a stock photo of a happy family in front of a beach house. But the name rang a bell. Avery Fitzgerald. Eric opened the message. I read your post about Arcadia. If you're serious about what you said, there's a way we can help. Avery didn't waste time with pleasantries. They got straight to the point. We're an organization called Fair Work. We work with whistleblowers who expose corporate misconduct, especially regarding discrimination and wrongful termination. We've seen similar patterns at other companies, and we'd like to help you take action. Eric stared at the screen. It felt like someone had handed him a lifeline. His eyes narrowed. His heart raced. What do you mean, help me take action? He typed back. Avery's reply was quick. We have resources to investigate your claims. We can support you in gathering evidence, potentially working with media outlets to expose Arcadia's practices, and even pushing for a lawsuit, if that's the route you choose. But we need someone with courage to go public. Someone who's already taken the first step, someone like you. Eric's hands trembled as he typed his response. What's the catch? Avery answered honestly. There's no catch, but there's risk. It could get ugly. Legal battles, media scrutiny. The company will likely come after you. You could lose everything, or you could change everything. It's up to you. Eric stared at the message for a long time. The weight of the decision pressed against his chest. This wasn't just about him anymore, it was about all those people who had been too afraid to speak. People like Marcus and Camilla, who had quietly taken the hits, kept their heads down and moved on. People whose voices had been smothered by corporate power. Now, maybe for the first time, he could make sure they weren't forgotten. The plan forms. It wasn't an easy decision, but Eric's resolve began to solidify as the days passed. He was tired of being silenced. He was tired of watching the system perpetuate injustice. He started gathering his evidence. Emails, meeting notes, conversations. He reached out to former colleagues, asking them to speak up anonymously. Slowly, the floodgates began to open. People started talking. One by one, Eric connected with others who had faced the same discrimination. Former employees, some who had left voluntarily, and others who had been let go for similar reasons. The stories mirrored his own microaggressions, missed opportunities, outright biases. He had his team. Together, they began compiling a detailed report of Arcadia's discriminatory practices. The document was airtight testimonials, data from performance reviews, and even leaked internal memos that outlined biases in the company's hiring processes. All the proof they needed to show that Arcadia wasn't just failing to support its minority employees, it was actively pushing them out. Fair Work helped organize the legal side, hiring a lawyer who specialized in whistleblower protection. Avery stayed in constant contact, coaching Eric on how to navigate the complexities of going public without jeopardizing his safety or reputation. But as much as Eric wanted to do the right thing, part of him hesitated. The fear of losing everything was still there, lurking in the background. What if the company sued him for defamation? What if they turned the public against him? But then Eric thought back to those months at Arcadia. The long nights, the meetings, he should have been part of the opportunities his colleagues had lost because of the company's skewed priorities. What did he have to lose now? The public unveiling. Eric and the team decided the best way to reveal the findings was through social media. LinkedIn was a professional network, but it had become a powerful platform for activism in recent years. With the report ready, Avery and Eric worked together to craft a post that would shake the corporate world. The night before the post was scheduled to go live, Eric stood in front of the mirror, his heart pounding in his chest. He thought about the old version of himself, the one who had been quiet, professional and compliant. He wasn't that person anymore. At 10:00 a.m., sharp Eric hit send. The post began with a simple statement. I was fired for questioning my company's treatment of its minority employees. This is the report I submitted before my termination. And the truth is, I wasn't the problem. I was the solution they didn't want to hear. He attached the report, screenshots, emails, testimonials. The truth in its rawest form. The post went viral. Within hours, news outlets picked it up. Journalists from major publications reached out. His inbox flooded with messages of support, some from people who had worked at Arcadia, others from people at other companies facing similar issues. The consequences begin. Arcadia didn't respond right away. But it wasn't long before they tried to spin the story. Gilmore made a statement claiming Eric was disgruntled and had been let go due to performance issues. They labeled him a troublemaker and suggested that he had misunderstood the company's intentions. It didn't work. More employees came forward. A former senior exec gave an anonymous interview with a local news station, corroborating Eric's story. The media began to pick apart the company's carefully curated image. Within a week, the pressure mounted. The tipping point came when an independent investigation was launched by a third-party auditor reviewing Arcadia's hiring practices. Public pressure grew. The company couldn't ignore the evidence. They couldn't silence everyone, and soon the executive board had no choice but to take action. The fallout from Eric's post had been swift. Arcadia's carefully constructed reputation was crumbling. Within a week of Eric's LinkedIn post, the media had picked up the story. News outlets across the country were covering it. The once untouchable ad agency was now under the harsh spotlight of public scrutiny. But it wasn't just the media that took notice. The public did too. Support poured in from unexpected corners. Former employees, some who had long since left Arcadia, came forward with their own accounts of discrimination. Anonymous sources sent in confidential documents, emails, and even performance reviews that highlighted the extent of the bias that Eric had fought to expose. The tide had turned. Eric couldn't believe how quickly things were spiraling. One minute, he was the disgruntled ex-employee with no voice. The next, he was the face of a corporate reckoning. But the twist hadn't come yet. A sudden visit. The reckoning. It was on a Tuesday afternoon, just as Eric was sitting at his makeshift home office sorting through emails of job offers and interviews that his phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. He answered cautiously, expecting another recruiter or some media outlet wanting a statement. But the voice on the other end wasn't who he expected. "Eric, it's Sarah McAllister," the voice said. "I'm the lead investigator with the independent audit team hired to look into Arcadia. We've reviewed the data you provided. We need to meet." His heart skipped. "An investigator?" "I can't go into the details over the phone," Sarah continued. "But what we found, it's worse than we thought. Can you meet me at my office tomorrow? I think it's time we talk." Eric agreed, his mind racing. This was no longer about getting back at his former boss. This was bigger than he imagined. The discovery. The full extent of the betrayal. The next day, Eric arrived at the law firm's downtown office. Sarah McAllister was waiting for him, along with 2 other lawyers and a data analyst. "We've completed our initial review of the documents," Sarah said, "and I have to say, I'm honestly shocked. What we uncovered wasn't just a pattern of bias. It was a company-wide systemic issue spanning years." She slid a thick folder across the table to Eric. He opened it to find internal memos, employee surveys, and more confidential documents that had been leaked to the investigators. They painted a damning picture. Not only were minority employees overlooked for promotions, as you mentioned, but there's evidence of active cover-ups and even illegal hiring practices, Sarah continued. "We also found several instances of senior executives, including Gilmore, using racist and discriminatory language in private meetings. It's all here proof that the company deliberately avoided diversity in hiring and promotions." Eric felt his pulse quicken. This was far beyond anything he had imagined. Arcadia wasn't just flawed, it was a toxic environment. It wasn't just one bad decision. It was a culture that perpetuated inequality at every level. The turning point, a public reveal. The audit report was about to be made public. As the investigation team worked tirelessly to corroborate everything Eric had said, the news cycle was filled with updates. Eric's post on LinkedIn had been the catalyst, but now there was evidence, solid, undeniable proof. Arcadia couldn't hide anymore. Gilmore, who had been the mastermind behind the company's indifferent policies, was suddenly facing intense pressure. His image, once polished and untouchable, was unraveling before his eyes. The board of directors was in damage control mode. The lawsuit that Eric had been warned about, it was imminent. But the real kicker, Arcadia, wasn't just under investigation anymore. They were about to face a full-blown public relations nightmare, one that could have them fighting for their survival in the market. Revenge, the collapse of Arcadia's leadership. As the investigation continued to unfold, a stunning revelation surfaced. Gilmore, the CEO, wasn't just an unwilling participant in the company's discriminatory practices. He was an active instigator. The independent investigation revealed that Gilmore had been receiving personal bonuses based on hiring practices that deliberately excluded minority candidates. Worse, internal emails showed that he had once remarked, "I don't think clients want to see a black man running our tech campaign no matter how good his work is." Eric's heart pounded as he read the emails. This was it. This was the moment. The truth was out. The following week, Arcadia's board was forced to make a decision. In a stunning move, Gilmore was fired. The company issued a public apology, but it was clear that the damage had already been done. Shareholders were nervous. Clients began pulling their contracts. the company's stock value plummeted. In a final act of defiance, Arcadia's PR team tried to downplay the situation, blaming Eric for the whole ordeal. But it didn't work. The media, led by investigative outlets, followed the trail back to Gilmore and the board. It became a full-blown scandal. Eric knew the company would fight back. They would try to discredit him, but they couldn't rewrite history. The truth was too loud now. Karma, the real victory. For Eric, the ultimate moment of triumph came when he was invited to a national conference on workplace equality. There, he was asked to speak about his journey, about the power of speaking up, and the price of silence. As he stood before the crowd, he saw the faces of those who had once whispered their support from the sidelines. He saw their courage in their eyes now too. They were no longer afraid. Eric took a deep breath and began speaking. His voice was steady, his words powerful. He wasn't just telling his story anymore. He was telling the story of every person who had been silenced, every person who had been overlooked, rejected, and dismissed. He wasn't just a former employee who had been fired. He was a symbol of what happens when you refuse to be silenced. Sometimes the only way to make change is to disrupt the system, he said, looking out at the sea of faces. And when you do, be ready, because karma has a way of making sure the truth is heard. The months that followed were nothing short of transformative. Arcadia's fall from grace was swift and irreversible. The company's leadership reshuffled the HR department, overhauled, and Gilmore's name would forever be tied to scandal and disgrace. The company's investors started pulling out, and its reputation as a top-tier agency was reduced to rubble. But for Eric, the victory wasn't just in watching the company crumble. It wasn't even in seeing Gilmore fired. The real victory was in what came next, the change he helped create. Eric's voice became a symbol for corporate accountability and social justice. He continued to speak at conferences and workshops, advocating for fairer, more inclusive workplaces. People began to listen. His message was loud and clear. Systemic injustice could only be eradicated if those in power were willing to face the truth. He was invited to share his story on major platforms, podcasts, talk shows, and even a high-profile TED Talk. Each time, he found new ways to articulate his journey, inspiring others to stand up against discrimination and fight for equality in their own workplaces. His name became synonymous with courage, not just because he had exposed the flaws of a powerful corporation, but because he had become a voice for the silenced. Then came the ultimate acknowledgement. Eric was offered a position at a new company, one that had been founded on the principles of equality, fairness, and inclusivity. They wanted him not just as an employee, but as a partner to help shape the culture and policies that would guide the company forward. As he accepted the offer, Eric reflected on the journey, from the pain of losing his job to the challenge of standing alone against an entire corporation. He had come out stronger, not just for himself, but for every person who had ever felt marginalized. And it was at that moment, standing at the threshold of this new opportunity, that Eric realized something powerful. Sometimes the hardest battles